Hello, Lou here. For years I struggled with structuring stories, and so I spent ages looking into it, and I came up with 20 story questions that you can ask yourself in order to help you structure a story, whether that's a screenplay, a novel, a short story. It actually doesn't matter what kind of story you're writing. These 20 questions will really help you. And they help you to create something that I like to call the shape of a story. And then what you write is obviously entirely up to you, but it gives you a framework, if you like. And I suggest that you then go on to draw that framework, even if you draw stick people, in boxes. So create a storyboard, in other words. Now you can skip that storyboarding step, but it does really help you to visualize the story on the page. Now today I'm going to talk about 7 story questions, because you don't answer all of the 20 questions in one go. You start off with 7 basic questions, and then the other questions sort of fill in the gaps around the first 7, if you see what I mean. And in order to find out what all of the 20 questions are, you need to download the worksheet that goes with this video. But here are the 7 basic story questions to allow you to start to build your story. Answer these first, so don't be tempted to download the worksheet and simply work through all 20. Answer these 7 basic ones first. Trust me, it will help, and then go in and fill the details with the other questions. It will make sense when you do it. So first of all, decide on the world of your story. Now, a world doesn't have to be a sci-fi world. It doesn't have to be one of Jupiter's moons. It could be, say, a hotel where your story is set, or it could be maybe a beachside cafe, or it could be a school where one of your characters works. But try to be really specific about the world in which your story is set, or the environment, if you like, the places involved in your story. So start with that, and then decide what goes wrong in that world. What goes wrong? It can be a small thing or a big thing. And you might want to sleep on that and just let your imagination play with the idea and come back to it, and then write some notes. So you've got the world and you've got what goes wrong in that world. Now at this point, I suggest you stop and think about your main character. And a really good way to think about characters is to think in terms of jobs, and that doesn't have to be employed work. It simply means what they spend most of their time doing during the day. So use your imagination. So it could be an actual job that they get paid for, they could be volunteering somewhere, or simply what they do with their time, and write that down. And of course, the world you've created and the problem you've created and the character you've created will all go hand in hand. So it may be that you had an idea for the character already and you've already put them in a world. If so, flesh out that character now. Think more about what they do with their time. If not, spend some time thinking about your character and placing them in that world and thinking about what problems they face. So as with most things creative, you don't have to do these 3 things one after another: the world, what goes wrong, and then thinking about expanding your characterization. You could think of the character first, you could think of the world first, you could think of the problem first. But those 3 things go hand in hand. So I've deviated from the 7 basic story questions here just to say, remember your main character, because that affects the next question, which is, who is there to help your main character? It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be somebody they meet. So write down some notes on that and then come back to the next question. And now this next role is traditionally called the baddie, the antagonist, but it actually doesn't have to be somebody who's set out to be evil. It doesn't have to be a kind of superhero scenario and supervillain scenario. This can just be an ordinary person who has different goals from your main character. It depends what kind of story you're writing, so it can be subtle. But the next question is, who is there to stop your main character achieving what they want to achieve? Who's there to stop them solving that problem that's come up in their world? And then decide how things get worse in your main character's world. And then what's the worst that could happen to them? And quite often as writers, we try to be far too nice to our main characters and we let them off the hook all the time. But readers love stories with problems, and they love to see main characters overcome story problems. And so the worse those problems can be, the more your reader's going to get involved in the story. And you'll remember that from books and stories you've read and programs you've watched and films you've watched, that when there's a really tough problem for the main character to solve, that's when you really get hooked on the story, especially if you really empathise with the main character. So what's the absolute worst that could happen? And then the final one of the basic questions is, what changes by the end of the story? Has that main character solved their problems? Is there a new problem in their world? Is there some kind of resolution? Have they changed as a person? What have they lost? What have they gained? And as I suggested for the first 3 questions, sometimes the answers to these 7 won't necessarily come to you in the order that I've suggested them. And sometimes you need to sleep on it, let your imagination work over these things, and then make notes on it the next day. So let me go through those 7 basic questions again, but remember, you can be creative with them and play around with them. And remember, you want to think about your main character. I've suggested using a job as a way in, but think about your main character as you go through the questions. Remember, your main character isn't separate from the place of your story, the setting of your story, or the problems involved in the story, and what goes wrong in that world. They're not somehow separate, but they're intimately involved. So the plot, the storytelling, and the character are entwined with each other. So I'm suggesting that you create both at the same time, but give yourself time to do that. Give your imagination time to work on it. So thinking about your character, create the world of the story and what goes wrong in their world and who's there to help them, who's there to try and stop them, how do things get worse, what's the worst that could happen, and what changes. And if you'd like to look at the other 20 questions, then you can download the Shape of a Story worksheet that goes with this video.